folks to join. Good to see everyone this morning. We'll just take a moment for just give it until about 9:05 or so. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining and good morning. My name is Emily Buerer. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, or CAFF. And we just like to welcome you this morning to our webinar where we have two excellent speakers. We're excited to hear from Rory Crowley this morning and from Jeff Mitchell. And of the webinar or discussion really is going to be around different kind of cover crop management considerations, as well as nitrogen management. You're going to talk about biosolarization as well for orchards, and some exciting new research will be discussed around water dynamics. So really just a number of kind of a breadth of different topics around cover cropping and around soil health. And before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping tips. If you have any general kind of questions or just general comments, we'd ask that you put those into the chat box, which you can find on this, should be on the side of your screen. And at the end, we're gonna make some time for a Q&A with our speakers. So please do, put any questions that you have into the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And before we kind of jump into things, I'd like to just take a second to share about the Sacramento Valley Technical Assistance Hub, which is a partnership formed by CAFF, as well as California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. And the goal of this this project or program really is to provide direct assistance to farmers, especially who are interested in implementing or dialing in their system as far as trying out soil health practices, different things that help the farm function as its own agro-ecosystem. So that might be cover cropping, reduced tillage, just a variety of different kind of farm practices. And, we realize that these things can require, or they can involve some risk, and there can be a learning curve. And so, really the objective of this group that we have, the Sac Valley TA Hub, is to connect you with a local technical assistance provider or expert in your area who can provide, direct kind of information about how to make that process easier. So with that said, I think we have a couple of partners from the Sac Valley TA Hub on the call here, and we'd like to just do a quick round of introductions and just say hello, see who's available, in your area that we might be able to plug you in with. So I might ask Rose if you're able to allow those folks to share their videos. That would be great, and we can just say hi. I think we have a couple folks from Colusa County RCD on the call, and we may have I think a couple of other local RCD folks. Are you able to see if we're able to
Victor
anybody up?
And Kelly should be able to. introduce themselves?
Yeah, thanks for being present today, Victor and Kelly. If you'd like to just say hello and just give a really short kind of background about your organization, and maybe say where you're coming from, that would be awesome.
Sure, I can start. So I'm Kelly Huff. I'm with the Dixon Resource Conservation District, and we are co-located with Solano RCD in Dixon, and we work a lot with irrigated growers on the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and have really appreciated being able to work with other technical assistance providers and get together periodically. So we're kind of coordinating what we're doing and making sure we all help get the word out about events. And it's just been great to all be checking in regularly. So yeah, and Martha McKean is also on here, and several others. We work with NRCS and Cooperative Extension, everybody. So thanks for being here today.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. Appreciate that. Victor, yeah, you want to go ahead and share briefly?
Yeah, so hey everybody, my name is Victor Briones and I work with the Colusa County Resource Conservation District. We're located in Colusa, California, and we work with local producers and the local NRCS office to provide technical assistance and then finding grants to be able to implement different projects. And right now, something that we're working on is we have Soil Health Connection YouTube channel that we do in cooperation with the Cooperative Extension, and just doing talking with either producers or professionals in agriculture, discussing different soil health practices and different research that they do. So, you know, that's something to kind of look into that we have going on. And we also do episodes in Spanish. We're trying to do a little bit more outreach to our Latino growers population. So that's one of the ways that we've been trying to get out there. We have a total, I believe, of about 4 episodes, and we'll be filming another one soon in Spanish. So definitely check it out and, you know, let anybody you know about it. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Victor. Yeah, great to hear about those new resources coming out. And, you know, we have a couple of other partners that are part of this hub. We have YOLO, RCD, NCAT, National Center for Appropriate Technology, who operates, you know, statewide as a partner. Solano RCD, as Kelly mentioned, and also UC Cooperative Extension, kind of in the Sac Valley area. So we're glad to have those folks, you know, resources and connections and kind of expertise available, and happy to, you know, help plug anybody in where it might be useful. And so with that said, you know, I think we can kind of jump into our discussion and presentations here. And I'm really excited to have both Rory Crowley of Nicolaus Nut Company in Chico, California, here with us today, as well as Jeff Mitchell with UC Davis and UC Cooperative Extension. And, you know, they both have a wealth of experience, both in the field as well as, you know, doing academic research. And so we're excited to hear their different perspectives and expertise today, and kind of dive into, you know, more information about cover cropping. So, you know, with that said, I will hand it over to Rory. All yours, Rory.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to say thanks to everybody, especially CAFF. You guys are doing a great job. Congratulations on the nonprofit of the year, I think, for 2021 or whatever it was. That's pretty awesome. Great job. My name is Rory Crowley. I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at Nicolaus Nut Company. I'm also just kind of the ranch manager. I've been in the industry for about 6 years. Prior to that, I was in the academic world, but not on the ag side, on the history side, and not ag history, but like ancient history. So a little strange. Married the farmer's daughter, and she took me to Chico, and I just had to keep scratching that research itch, as I love agriculture. Nicolaus Nut Company We consist of about 550 acres, both almonds and walnuts. We call them almonds up here. That's their proper terminology. It's been a great experience. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to kind of get us going here, give you a little more information. Let me make sure I can do this. That's what I want. Everybody see that okay? All right, very good.
Looks good.
Title of this, we've got a little bit of an agenda here, biosolarization, cover crops, and nitrogen management in orchard systems, which is a very critical distinction with all of these things. We're also in the northern Sacramento Valley. I assume everybody knows the differences between the southern San Joaquin Valley and the Sacramento Valley in terms of the kind of the Central Valley. We've got different microclimates up here, different soils up here, different irrigation systems up here, different weather up here. So all of that is everything that I'm going to be talking about is really going to be couched in the northern Sacramento Valley in Chico. There's a lot of nuances to what we do that people don't do down south in orchard systems. And so just a little bit of a shout out there, kind of try to keep those nuances in mind as we track forward. But as I said, I'm Rory Crowley, Nicolaus Nut Company, Executive VP of Research, I guess. That's, like I said, I had to scratch the research itch. A little bit more about Nicolaus Nut Company. Our mission, vision, and core values. Our mission is to love our neighbor one nut at a time. That has everything to do with marketing. It has everything to do with the guy next to us who we're spraying by. It has everything to do with guys in those sprayers and our employees. It really informs everything that we do here at the company. Our vision is to see a world where agriculture serves the social, environmental, and economic good. Core value, people, we want to cultivate healthy lives. Planet, we want to preserve farmland and resources. Product, we want to grow nuts and relationships. That's who we are. That's what our heartbeat is, and that's kind of what drives us. Overall approach to farming, Nicolaus Nut Company is conventional, but I would argue, and I'm sure some will disagree, we are becoming sustainable and regenerative. And I hope by the end of this, you'll understand what I mean by that. We are, I believe, in many ways, industry leaders in agriculture, innovation, and implementation. A couple things that we have pioneered. Biosolarization, we've helped pioneer some things in cover cropping, including nitrogen fixation and water. And Jeff's been a big part of that, and with his own team and his own research, which I've been I am indebted to that guy for doing everything he does in our world, and keep moving that dial forward. But we have implemented pressure bomb implementation. We use ET models, soil probes for water use efficiency. We've built variable rate irrigation systems around soil types. Can't really get into that today, but I will show you a couple pictures of what that looks like. We do navel orangeworm pheromone. We just started some codling moth pheromones, or codling moth pheromone in the walnuts, which we're just starting this year. Obviously cover cropping. Over the last 6 years, we've partnered with dozens, I think, researchers, but about a half a dozen university-led, peer-reviewed in-field research trials over the last 5 or 6 years, which has been key to fulfilling that mission and vision. And so it's been a good time. Some things that we really can't talk about, water use efficiency, but this is kind of the variable rate irrigation system that we decided to implement a couple years ago. We built a Cadillac system around the soil types to try to help utilize our water much more efficiently than we already do. We're also implementing those pheromone, which is cut down sprays by at least half, if not 60 to 70%. We love the navel orangeworm puffers, man. We see tremendous benefit here, both economically and environmentally. Things we can't get into today, but just things that kind of are pushing the dial forward in terms of regen and sustainability. So kind of getting into biosolarization is the first part of this topic here. Biosolarization is a very unique technology. Ever since World War II, we've had very powerful chemical agents that would essentially kind of nuke our ground as we were replanting an orchard. We tear out an orchard, and then we put these telone or chlorpicrin into the ground after those trees are pulled out, and essentially just kind of eradicate any and all microbial activity, but particularly we're trying to go after those nematodes, both root lesion and ring nematodes. In the map that I just showed you where we did the variable rate irrigation system, that's where we did biosolarization. And the reason why we did biosolarization was for the following. We're right near Highway 99, California Highway 99. We had a preschool right next to us. Regulation is basically making it very cost prohibitive to do any kind of fumigation now out here on a conventional scale. So cost is very key. And then just common sense. When I came into the world of agriculture, I saw something like fumigation as indiscriminately killing good microbes in the ground, possibly, and it's just they're dangerous products, dangerous materials. So the question on the table was, how can we move forward and do so in a way that is organic as much as possible, is regenerative, and is sustainable. A bit of a lengthy, I'm sorry, this is where my academics come in, but it's hard to explain biosolarization as without such a big paragraph, so I'll try to do my best, and if you have any questions, please save them to the end. But biosolarization essentially is the process of adding organic residues to the soil. In this case, we used almond hull and shell that came off the processing line that actually don't go to the international market. And we kind of got an overabundance of that. We're trying to find new markets for that. But we take that almond hull and shell, we till it into the ground anywhere from 6 to 8 inches. We put a drip line over that tillage, and then we lay a plastic, a total impermeable plastic, which they actually use in chemical fumigation, over that drip. And then we activate that kind of beneficial resident soil with this organic residue. So to make a long story short, the good microbes kind of go to work and produce kind of a biopesticidal effect, action to inactivate or kill harmful soil pests, including, in this case, was nematodes, both ring and root lesion. We partnered with UC Davis, a scholar, I would say, a professor by the name of Chris Simmons, who's kind of pioneered this work in many, many ways. Here's a little bit of a kind of a diagram to show you kind of what it kind of looks like. We did a lab scale first. We took resident soil from our orchard. We took it into the lab. We had both types of target pests in that soil. We knew they were there. They were at high levels. So we took it into the lab. We did a lab scale. We got funded to the tune of $25,000 or something like that to do this lab scale, just to kind of make sure that we can do something like this. They took orchard whole or almond hull and shell, and they basically replicated the type of thing that we were going to try to do in the field in terms of this biosolarization. And that was very successful. So successful, we had 100% kill in each one of our trials. At least in the lab. So I said, okay, we need to go get more money. And I want to do this at full scale as far as we can. And at that point, we had this orchard coming out. It was a walnut orchard. And I said, I think I could do this before we plant this almond orchard. And so we took it upon ourselves to get the money. The almond board came through with a significant amount of dollars to make this happen. And we partnered with Chris Simmons and his team, and we made it happen. We got some amazing results. I think we had, I want to say, it was over 20 replicated lines. We did different types of pollinator holes and non-Purell holes, and we had a lot of good replication with controls. But essentially what we found was almost a complete deactivation to the tune, depending on which specific mix we were looking at. But we had almost a complete deactivation at 8 days into 10. From there, we tried to push that biopesticidal effect. It's kind of a vinegarizing of the soil. We tried to push it down with water through that soil profile, which we were able to do. We created kind of a column to see how far that that biopesticide would go down, because, you know, the theory is that, well, telone and chlorpicrin and these chemical fumigants, they go down to 5 feet. How are you ever going to get that? I just said with water, you know, if we're producing a biopesticide on the top, all we have to do is push it down. We were highly successful at that. We also raised the organic matter in the top of the aerobic layer 1 to 1.25% just with our inputs with whole and shell. As far as I know, that is unheard of in the California world. You know, maybe Jeff's been able to do it over his 30 years of plant and cover crops, which is certainly a big part of organic matter and carbon sequestration. But just that alone has been very critical to looking at water use efficiency and nitrogen uptake and utilization and things like that. And so it just produced a beautiful type of soil. We didn't do the whole field. We had to do kind of a smaller scale given the dollars that we were given. But essentially, that goes on to cover crop. Essentially, we continue the monitoring process here in our field. The first 2 years, these trees were having a little bit of a hard time in the treated rows to kind of become used to that new soil environment. So on the controls, we actually had larger growth the first year and a half on the trunk diameter, which kind of scared me because, as Emily said, we took some risks to do this. Some big risks, but year 3 and 4 and now 5, those trunks have seriously outpaced the controls. So it took them a little bit of time to get comfortable in that soil. But in terms of the just everything that we were trying to do, we did it and more. And it was we published a peer-reviewed paper on this. We continue to do a lot of kind of coming back to the orchards and looking at things. The trees look beautiful, and it's just been a heck of a deal. So that's biosolarization. Like I said, if you have any questions, please hold them. But we got to kind of move on to our cover crop program. A history of cover crop at Nicolaus Nut Company. When I first came, I was very, very interested in this idea of cover crop and excuse me, and why it mattered for us to pursue, especially because of our mission and vision. As a part of fulfilling that mission, vision, core values, I saw pretty high potential in cover cropping. We still hold that we need to be academically humble with what we don't know. We do believe that it may be key to many of the benchmarks we're trying to hit environmentally, socially, economically, including possible impacts on water use and conservation. I think with Jeff's work, that's one of the most solid things that we see coming out of the cover crop world, particularly in orchard systems. Clearly, bee health is a huge thing in the almond world. Pollinator health, we see huge benefits for that. Chemical, physical, and biological makeup of the soils, to a lesser degree, those kind of things are a little bit more difficult to kind of wrap our hands around and wrap our heads around and test and these kind of things. But at the end of the day, we see benefits there. Nematode reduction is pretty well documented, especially with mustards. We did continue to see that even after biosolarization. We continue to plant high amounts of yellow and white mustards in our orchards. Decreased conventional inputs, particularly with nitrogen. I can't get into the details here, but Nicolaus Nut Company partnered a couple years ago with CSU Chico with the fava bean master, Dr. Zachary. And we've got Lundberg Family Farms up here. Bryce Lundberg is kind of a fava bean guru. And so we know how well the fava bean, generally speaking, can fix nitrogen out of the environment and put it into the ground. So we had a trial there in one of our walnut orchards, one of our up and coming walnut orchards. It was great. It was fun. We saw a lot of benefit. And then obviously, again, in terms of soil erosion and displacement due to flooding, this ranch that we were talking about, Kitty Hawk Ranch, where the biosolarization happens, on the whole north end of that ranch, we have Kiefer Slough, which is a seasonal creek that has a tendency to flood in a bad year. And prior to doing cover crops, I saw one year, I think it was 2018, I had not planted cover crops in one particular orchard, which I should have, and the soil erosion was absolutely significant. It probably took $20,000 over 50 acres just to get the orchard floor back to where it needed to be before harvest. The next year we had more flooding. It might have been 17 and 18. I might be getting these years behind, but I had a cover crop in there and I saw virtually zero soil erosion. Where I did see soil erosion, the cover crop wasn't there because that was in the strips and we normally chemically mow those. So in terms of soil erosion displacement, I've seen it, I've watched it, I believe in it, it's real. Put roots in the ground, soil's gonna stay there. Kind of just a little bit of a brief thing here. We started with 50 acres. We started real small because we didn't know what we were doing, just some pretty standard mustard mixes. We expanded to 130 acres on the same orchard, young walnuts, mustard, radishes, and canola. Year 3, we expanded to 225 acres on fully mature young and new plantings, mustard, radishes, canola. We also planted some wheats and some clovers. Excuse me. And then NNC, over the past 6 years has had multiple university-led, commodity board funded collaborative projects with Almond Board, Walnut Board, UC Extension, Western SAR, CSU Chico, obviously Jeff, UC Davis, and all of those things have produced at least some paperwork, but a lot of knowledge in my world, and it's been good. A couple of things I just want to kind of talk about. From my perspective, I hear a lot of people say, I don't want to, in the kind of more conservative, conventional world, I don't want to plant cover crops because I've been trying to eradicate mustard in my orchard for 30 years and you're planting it, and, those kind of things. And I get that. On the other side, I hear that cover crops are going to be kind of the save all of carbon sequestration and helping the soil get to a place. Yes and amen to all of that. However, I'm a data guy. And we need data to substantiate these claims that we're making, especially in the orchard world, especially when 98% of California's Central Valley is conventional. It's going to take growers like us, like perhaps some of the guys and gals here on this webinar, to go out there and to get that data. And it's going to be a slow process. Usually I hear cover crops will save the world by taking all the carbon out of the air and putting it into the earth. It's going to save all the bees. It's going to do everything for water that it needs to. I really agree with a lot of these things, but at the end of the day, we do need to have balance. In my own world, Rory, I've been, trying to eradicate cover crop for 30 years. I've heard that from multiple independent sources. Okay. And it's interesting to hear that. It costs too much. I don't want to manage it. Managing a cover crop is actually a legitimate deal that we have to talk about. Hippy dippy environmental stuff. I've heard that one. So the truth is we have to have balance and academic humility, in my opinion, as we look at cover crops, particularly in California's northern Sacramento Valley, where we've been doing our research. Sometimes we're not going to be able to water a cover crop in the San Joaquin Valley, for example, where there's only drip, where they don't get a lot of rain. It's not going to be a save all for every almond grower in the world. Cover crops can certainly help save the honeybees. They can certainly store carbon. We know this. This is data that's been substantiated. Cover crops can help the soil structure, no doubt about that. There's vast potential for water savings, percolation, getting things into the aquifer, no doubt about that. We've basically proved that nitrogen fixation, at least with the fava bean in a walnut, in a 5th-year walnut, can help offset certain nitrogen inputs on a conventional level. And so we've kind of moved that dial a little bit. Guys are seeing us grow these kind of things. I would still say that the agroeconomic analysis of cover crop planting needs much more strict research. What I mean by that is you're never going to get adoption if you can't show someone how to do it and how it's going to affect their bottom line. And one of the things that is tough is that cover crops just take a while to really see a difference in the soil, right? And so it just takes time. It takes grit, it takes energy, it takes money. It's not like ammonium sulfate or CAN 17 nitrogen where you just throw it out on the trees and in 5 days, boom, they're forest green and it looks awesome. This is about it's about turning that barge again that we've been turning for so long, and kind of, I've heard the term desertifying our soils or mining our soils, these kind of things. We really have to get back into the long-term view. which is really, really important from where I stand. So balance and academic humility is really important for us to say before we kind of go out there with our blasts about what cover crop is and is not. We're doing our research in a very specific way, in a very specific type of environment, in a very specific microenvironment for very specific purposes. And it's hard. Cover cropping is hard in an orchard system. Cover cropping is hard. I don't know if it's hard anywhere else, but it's hard in an orchard system for multiple reasons. And the challenges here, just a couple. Harvest timing, for example, a typical, in the northern Sacramento Valley, where you can irrigate in cover crops with your frost system or something, or your normal irrigation sprinkler system, cover cropping, it comes up, the cover crop planting ideal timing comes up against harvest, especially if you have walnuts. Typically they say October 1st. Well, October 1st, I'm into my chandlers, and my chandlers constitute the most I have in terms of crop. And so I'm not going to be able to get it in October 1st because I'm focusing on the one paycheck we get a year. Heat and water at the time of planting, proper germination is key. One of the biggest distinction is young orchard and old orchard. Our goal as an orchardist is to get 100% canopy, leaf canopy, surface area in the leaves as we can for a full production orchard. Well, what does that do? Well, that inhibits light to the ground, right? And so if you're trying to plant a cover crop at the ideal timing in an orchard, in a full production orchard in October 1st, you're not going to have a lot of sun. You're not going to have a lot of good germination. It's going to be difficult. So what we found is that the younger these trees are in their early years, the more beneficial we can get on a germination. Just food for thought, just think about it. Huge distinction between annual rainfall versus irrigation. We get a lot of rain up here. We also have frost protection. A lot of guys have drip and drip alone in the almond world. They're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to germinate these seeds. They're just going to cast them out and that's it. So it's not north versus south is really, really important. Irrigation types are really important. Fall fertilizers can inhibit, in my opinion. We go in after harvest and typically we do an 11-52-0. We do a SOP slug, to the tune of 250 pounds an acre. We don't go in some guys go in at 700 after, and they'll band it and this kind of stuff. We just don't see that as a good resource environmentally or otherwise. And so when to terminate and how is really critical. We've got a flail mower, we've got a crimper, we can disc it in. But again, the sun is also critical as well. Give me 1 second. The bottom line, I know this is a lot of words, I'll try to make it simple. Cover cropping in orchard systems in the Central Valley of California is highly complex and should be nuanced in very, very unique ways, depending on where you're at, depending on what your irrigation is. And it's still largely in its infancy with regard to the science and art and potential benefits in perennial specialty crop orchard systems. So that's where I stand in the world. I'm not an organic farmer. I'm not a row cropper. I don't grow tomatoes. We're still working on stuff here in the orchards, okay? Much work has to be done and continues to be done by growers to establish best management practices, economic analysis, cost benefits, such as cover crops. What kind of impacts can we be making in a long-term perspective? You really got to have a grower who's committed to doing this for a long time. And you really got to have researchers and the money committed to watching the soil for a long time. Jeff could probably speak more to that. Still, caution must be sought with regard to not speaking about cover crop as the best thing in the world to solve all the world's ills, nor should we discount cover crop out of hand strictly because it's difficult to implement, or we don't know what it's going to do, or we don't know how to manage it, or whatever. We need academic humility and balance, in my opinion. Our goal, one of my mottos is, if I put life into the soil, I'm going to get life out of the soil. I have seen that most assuredly with cover crops, okay? And with biosolarization, increasing organic matter. But at the end of the day, cover crops fulfills that motto for me. I put life in, I get life out. That's the bottom line. Cover crops can be key for life in the orchard context in our view. Just a couple pictures here. Obviously, pollinators is really awesome and cool. Let's see. Oh, sorry, going too fast. This was our first year cover cropping. We didn't have a great germ. It was a broadcast, but we got pretty good. And we had to start doing groundwork here. So this was kind of in the spring. As you can see, those almonds in the background, they're doing leaf out. This is probably post bloom, maybe March sometime. We had a pretty good stand, but that was a broadcast application. We moved to a no-till drill, which is much more efficient in my opinion, and gets a better germination. We had it up to the belt, felt pretty good about that. That's what it looked, because we were replanting this orchard, we had to do a disc. I wanted to go in there and kind of chop it up a little bit, particularly because of the nematodes. Obviously you see a lot of mustard there. Wanted to chop it up, get it in before the last spring rain, so then it could kind of just, however that mode of action works with the mustard, it was told to me that kind of work it in a little bit and do a disc over it. And there were no research projects in line on that one, but that's okay. Those are some daikon radish that we got year 2. I just look at that and I was like, man, that's just an amazing thing. The amount of organic matter that's going into the ground every couple square feet was incredible. And obviously, I have to admit, this was in a younger orchard, a lot of sun, beautiful fertility, and these things just went to town, and just an amazing deal. This was actually Dr. Mitchell's study here after we planted those almonds, after we did biosolarization. You can see the drip line there, but we also have solid set, frost control, and what we did to terminate this was we learned that a flail mower was kind of your friend, because we didn't want to disc, we didn't want to disturb the soil anymore. Obviously, we know what that does, and so we decided to flail mow it, and then we kind of went up over Dr. Mitchell's plots there, and we screwed it up a little bit, but we got a better stand this year. It was nice. I think he was happy with it, so that was nice. That's the back of a flail mower. That's, obviously looks real pretty coming up to that place, and pollinators were great. The other thing about, when your cover crop comes in and you've got a 50-acre orchard here that's full production, and then you got a young one, when that pollen goes away on the bloom side and they come over into this type of environment, you're just making those bees that much stronger. And yes, they do the circuit all around the country. We know for a fact that honeybees have a very strong start coming out of almonds, as long as we don't spray them with stupid stuff, which is less than 1% of the people out there spraying. But at the end of the day, when that pollen is done in that environment and they come over to this environment, they're getting an extra boost. Fully confident of that. I mean, I've seen just hordes and hordes and hordes of bees multiplying. I mean, I got beekeepers coming out going, oh my gosh, we got to get in here with more boxes, because the broods are multiplying and this kind of stuff, and it's much due to this type of environment. So it's a critical thing. Let's see. I think I've got I don't know if this one's going to work. Hold on. That's an in orchard environment. Full production. We're still able to get a good stand. The further away you can get away from those trees, that was a 10-foot swath. That's still a pretty good stand. That's pretty nice in my opinion. Some better than others. That's leaf out again, so we had a pretty good stand there. Something I want to show you too, something not often looked at, is the weed suppression and the competition that goes on. Right down the middle here is fleabane. And if you're a conventional operator, or if you're an organic, whatever kind of operator you are, fleabane is your nemesis, okay? And for whatever reason, and this was kind of more of a rye grass mix type of thing, but for whatever reason, the planter kind of went off and did its thing, but it looked like we planted fleabane, okay? We didn't plant fleabane, but the planter just kind of veered off to one side. Let me see if I can find that out. This one right here, maybe one of those on the no-till. cedar was blocked for whatever reason, and it looks like we planted that flea bait in there. So in terms of competition, cover crop has tremendous benefit to get some of this really difficult stuff that, you know, only like 2,4-D can get, or, you know, some kind of burned down material, or just crazy stuff that you don't want to use. So I always thought that was pretty cool. This is I just pulled this out randomly one year, and I don't know if you could see that, but there's some nodules on there. Those are the nitrogen nodules. That was a bean that I picked out, I think. But that's kind of what those things look like. As you can see, that soil structure, just a beautiful, amazing type of thing. And then here's another masterpiece. This was post bloom. These bees are just having a great time. They've been in the almonds, and now they're working very hard in this mustard, and you can't make a better environment for bees, in my opinion. So, Emily, how are we doing on time here?
Pretty good. I'd say about 5 minutes or so. Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
Yep, that sounds reasonable. Okay, we're gonna move on. There's another. Okay, nitrogen. We're conventional farmers. This is a widely published from various sources. Almond Board, UC publishes this. These are the 4 R's that we follow: right time, right rate, right place, right source. Generally speaking, this is for almonds. This is something that we follow. This is well documented, well verified as to where, when, and how, and by what means, and what kind of nitrogen an almond tree typically takes. And so we, generally speaking, follow this type of scenario as we're looking at our nitrogen program and as we're implementing it over the year. Bit of a just kind of a, and this comes from the best management practices for nitrogen management from the Almond Board. Generally speaking, there's these kind of resources out there that we really hone in on at Nicolaus Nut. We've got to kind of get through them here a little bit so I can talk about our program. But generally speaking, this is widely published online. You can look at, this is kind of what we're looking at when we look at it. Again, generally speaking, we have about 8 different applications of N in different forms at different times for different purposes. So we're going to talk about just almonds, not walnuts. After harvest, in anticipation of the next year, we do 10 gallons of UN32 as those trees are pretty parched after harvest. They're going to take up some N. We know that. We want to prime that pump. I continue to talk about this idea of priming the pump with nitrogen. In mid-January is our next application for almonds in the northern Sacramento Valley. We put on 250 pounds in a full production orchard of ammonium sulfate. And we do that 30 to 45 days before leaf out, which is basically where we are at in this neck of the woods, January 15th. At Pink Bud, we start a CAN 17 program consisting of 3 different applications at 10 gallons per acre. Caution must be taken here not to drive the nitrate further than the root zone. So watching the weather is key, especially up here in the northern Sacramento Valley. We really got to watch the weather. We want that to stay in anywhere from 6 to 18 inches in that aerobic layer so that it can have good utilization, especially with the nitrates. And as that ammonic breaks down, it kind of takes up the slack. At or around April 1st, we started UAN 32 applications to the tune of 7 gallons per acre. The CAN 17 and the ammonium sulfate is really to drive the nut formation and the multiplication of the cells in the nut itself. As you start moving into April, that nut is pretty filled out. It's not totally filled out. It's certainly not hard. There's some gelling going on, but then we go into UN32 and we start seeing some vegetative growth at this point. Ammonium sulfate is a nice, pretty critical thing that we have. It's a granular form. We know that the ammonic's going to stick around for 30 to 45 days as that soil continues to heat up. What did I do here? Ammonium sulfate continued. We have to continue to prime the pump, and that ammonium sulfate creates this versatility where we can get in there before or after a rain real quick and get it on in anticipation of more rains and the soil heating up. Our application, we got about 52.5 units from that 250 pounds per acre. which constitutes about 27% of our overall N program. At Pink Bud, which is Valentine's, you always remember Pink Bud up in the northern Sacramento Valley because it's Valentine's Day, and that's when I start putting on Can 17. Can 17 really is there to help that nut bulk. The calcium is real critical there. The nitrates are real critical because as that graph starts going up, you really need a lot of nitrogen in these almonds, more so than in the walnuts, to be honest. Walnuts are much more forgiving. The nitrate and mnemonic forms in Can 17 are key. Calcium is very important too. They're essential as we're trying to do this at the right time with the right source, so on and so forth. Calcium is critical in filling the cells that the N is producing, the nitrogen is producing, generally speaking. It makes the almonds fill out and bulk up. So Can 17, I'll just go down to the bottom here. We're kind of getting low on time. These applications will give you about 64.5 units of N for your nitrogen program, constituting about 34% of your overall N program. Again, Can 17, pretty high nitrates. Be careful, especially in the northern Sacramento Valley, so as to not leach. I mean, there's economic reasons why you don't want to leach stuff, not just sustainable reasons, right? Next in line is the urea ammonium nitrate. And this is a pretty standard program for conventional operations. It seems like a lot of nitrogen, but if you're doing it at the right time, right rate, right source, right place, you can really dial that thing in and make sure that you're being sustainable as possible. Urea starts in April 1st, generally speaking. We go about 7 gallons per application for 3 applications. The units up at this point, you're at 74.34 units with your urea, which constitute about 39% of your overall N program. Let's see, some other nuances. Again, widely published material that can be helpful to you. There's about 70 pounds of N per about 1,000 pounds of almonds. So if you're trying to hit that 25 to 3,000 pounds of almonds, do the math. For us, we go on the lower end of that to about 192.5. And as we start seeing the crop load, it's at that point we start saying, okay, do we need that extra CAM? Do we need that extra UAN? And so on and so forth. So other sources, got to be watchful of that. Everything, you've got to have your nitrogen budget dialed in. What are your nitrates in your water? When do you apply your 1152O? Obviously, you got 11% of the 1152O. Is it being applied in the fall? Is it being applied in the spring? Has it been leached? What kind of native organic matters are giving it up? That kind of stuff is all real critical, but I just wanted to show you our budget. So I think I made the time. So I want to say thanks to Emily, to the CAFF family, and to Dr. Jeff Mitchell, who's just been an incredible resource for us, him and many of the colleagues. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Wow. Very nice.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rory. Nicely done. Yeah, appreciate all of the, expertise that you've shared, and also that kind of dose of realism as well. And yeah, sometimes that can very much be needed. And I think we're just going to take a moment to allow Billy Sink, who's with Project APIS M, to share a little bit about the Seeds for Bees program, which I believe Nicolaus Nutt has worked with a bit. And yeah, happy to have Billy talk for a minute. Billy, are you able to share your mic?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Emily. Just real brief. I work for Project APIS M. We are a nonprofit organization. I manage the Seeds for Bees program. This is a program here for growers in the Central Valley, not just almond growers, but we have worked with all types of growers that have insect and wind pollinated stuff. So our program, our mixes have worked with almonds, walnuts, pistachios, grapes, table grapes, wine grapes, cherries, prunes, citrus, all kinds of different things. And you apply online on a link that I can share. And if your application is accepted, I reach out and provide some technical advice. I can even do site visits. And the first year you sign up, you get $2,000 worth of awarded $2,000 worth of free seed. And the second year you sign up, you get $1,000 worth of free seed. So depending on which seed mix you select and the planting rate, all things that I will help you figure out, that $2,000 worth of seed, that's anywhere from 50 to almost 100 acres of plantable cover crop seed. And considering, growers like Rory and others aren't necessarily planting 100% of their orchard, that 50 to 100 acres of cover crop can be planted on 200, 300, 400 acres of actual orchard or vineyard or whatever it might be. So I just want to give a real quick brief outline, and any more specific questions, you can contact me directly, and I'll put some information in the chat. Thanks for letting me speak real quickly, Emily.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, Billy. Yeah, definitely a good resource, especially for folks who are, kind of starting out with cover cropping. You can do a trial, basically, similar to what Rory talked about, and kind of scale up from there if it works for you. And just a note to continue to put any questions that you have in the Q&A, and we're going to have a little bit of time at the end to ask our speakers those questions. And check out the links that are being posted in the chat as well. As far as resources, I think we have a link to Seeds for Bees there as well for everybody. And with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Very grateful to have Jeff Mitchell here on board with us today. He has many years of experience, with academic and field research in the world of conservation agriculture. And so looking forward to hearing about some new research that is coming out, around cover cropping. And I think we're going to learn a bit about water dynamics and a number of different things. So thank you, Jeff, for being here with us today, and I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you very much, Emily. This is really a very wonderful and extremely nicely put together program this morning. I recognize several people who are participating, and I send my greetings to you all there. It's very nice to see the great network coordination that's going on in your region there, and the strengthening of technical service providers as well up there. This is fabulous, and I encourage your work up there. It's also very nice, and Rory Crowley is perhaps one of the most articulate people I think I've ever met, and his emphasis this morning on humility, it strikes me personally as being very important. So Rory, I appreciate your message there this morning. What I'd like to do here, let me see if I can, I'm having a little trouble moving the, let's see. I can't, or let me see how to advance the slides here. Oh, okay. Well, thank Emily, Sarah of CAFF there, and Rory for the encouragement to be part of you all today. I just want to very briefly start off with something to show really some innovative equipment and from down south here, and I'll give you the rationale for that in a second here. Then I want to introduce some of the, on the tail of what Rory put out there, without going into the hype and the exaggeration about claims of cover crops and everything, maybe some of the economic motivators for cover crops that we might not be thinking about it sometimes. And then I want to share some of our findings over the long haul with respect to some of the benefits that come out of these systems. And then, as Emily intimated there, I want to share some new stuff that we're consolidating about water. I just want to start off with a couple of pictures here that probably are not all that uncommon to many of us here who have been involved with orchards, to see water ponding. Rory talked about soil loss, erosion there. And these can be particular problems there. The innovative equipment that I want to talk about, and this is actually developed by a good friend of mine, Carrie Crum, down here with California Ag Solutions out of Madera, California. This is a low stature modified no-till drill that puts cover crop seed in the ground there. And it also has been fitted over here, if you look on the front of the unit here, with wavy coulters that allow the seed and the down pressure to get the seed into the ground there. So it's an adapted no-till drill, John Deere 1560, I think, model there. But what they also have created is and they're using this in orchard systems, and I'll show you where the innovation comes in a minute here. The fact that this has been developed now and what they're doing with very precision planting with another drill that they're worked on. I actually, when I bring the agronomy students down for our Saturday field trip in the fall quarter, I thought that it was significant enough to show them and introduce them to Kerry and his crew there at California Ag Solutions in Madera, because I think it has some applicability in the orchard situation there. Now, what they are doing, however, is unlike broadcast seeding cover crops throughout the entire middle area between the tree lines, they're using another kind of a drill, and it's an 11-foot wide drill, and they only put seed in the one side, 6 feet of one side, and then they come back on the other side here, and they're only planting cover crop seed right next to the tree lines. So you can see some examples of what that looks like right here. So imagine the middles are essentially unseeded. They're putting out about 40 pounds of seed per acre, and they can actually irrigate this up with drip lines early on in the fall if there's no rain. And you get really, once the winter rains hopefully will kick in there, I've actually monitored the growth there and the repeated cutting growth there that comes out of this. It can be very substantial there. So they've seen improvements in water infiltration right along that water application zone where the drip line or the sprinkler lines are coming there. So this is, again, quite a lot of biomass there, but I thought it was very interesting to share with you this morning. Let me put a little twist on the economic evidence that I want to bring up right now here about why these kinds of alternatives and some of the systems that Rory just laid out for us that they're working on up at Nicolaus there might be important here. A friend of mine is a farmer back in Pennsylvania. His name is Steve Groff, and just this year, actually, or 2020, he had a book called The Future Proof Farm published, and he's just a farmer there, and he wrote his own book there. What he does is he's actually challenging folks to start paying attention to the economic realities. And what his question here is in quotations there. Is your farm becoming obsolete? There are changes coming over the horizon in our industry that have ripple effects and are forcing farmers to make difficult decisions, that's for sure, about how they manage their soil. The reality is that you will become face to face with the supply chain that you're a part of. So what I'm doing, I'm not talking about production cost here. I'm actually talking about the economic incentive of maybe looking at some of these alternative practices because the supply chain might be demanding that in the future. 2019, I was part of this 600 people participant event, the sustainability conference in Indiana. And I don't know if you know, but Nestle's company is the largest food company in the world. They buy from every country in the world and they sell their food to every country in the world. The keynote speaker at this conference was the vice president of Nestle's. And she didn't mince words at all by saying that if you want to sell your food to us in the future, you're going to meet our specifications. What those specifications might be, not only are food quality for sure and safety, but maybe also related to how the food is actually grown there. Something else that perhaps some of you have gotten wind of up in the Northern California as well is also looking at this notion of market-based incentives for farm practices. There's a project underway right now, and it's called Regen 1, where they're trying to develop an evidence-based, place-based, market-driven platform that is going to reward farmers directly from the buyers for what they're doing in terms of their production practices. Rory talked about the buzzword regenerative ag, but this is a project that soon will be launched up in your region to try to accomplish that, to link the supply chain, the buyers, with the farmers or the producers here. And there could be many benefits that could come your way there. If you're interested in on this, I can share much more information about this. I've been a little bit a part of this for the last year as it's been being developed. Another very recent incentive for why cover crops might be increasingly relevant. Perhaps not as much in your area as over in Salinas, where this was actually an outcome from a very deliberate set of meetings that the water board over there had. They are now going to credit farmers in the Salinas Valley for their use of cover crops as a means for capturing and storing nitrogen in above ground biomass of the cover crop and not having that leach down into the groundwater. I don't want to get into too much of the details here, but that's a major accomplishment by a lot of the people who were part of the panel that presented evidence, including Eric Brennan from USDA, and to really make the case that cover crops can have a water quality benefit as well. And so that's coming something that it could be also an important aspect here. Let's talk now. Let me move on to some of the things that we've been working on down here in the San Joaquin for a good number of years, and just ask the question, are there any indications that soil function or quality or health is declining in orchards? I'm just not stating an opinion about this at this point. It's a legitimate hypothesis-driven kind of a question. And I already tipped my hand a little bit earlier by showing you some situations where I think the answer could be yes in some situations. Due to the traffic, a lot of times, compacted soils, there can be in certain situations the risk for soil loss, water loss in these kind of situations there. So what we have been trying to do is work with a number of orchard locations, all the way from Rory. Rory was the northernmost up in Chico, all the way down to Arvin, California, down in Kern County, and look at and try to assess some of the benefits in terms of soil function and water relations in orchards. But let me draw from one of the two. If you look over in California there are two studies that are long-term studies that are part of the North American Soil Health Institute's evaluation of 124 long-term research sites in northern North America, in Mexico, Canada, United States. And the one that I'm putting the arrow on there is where I want to share some information from right now. What we have done there now is over 20, 21 years there, we've actually grown, by and large, rain-fed irrigated or rain-fed cover crops. And you can see the difference in biomass that we get in different years there. The first year we actually did irrigate this up, and it makes sense that we got much more biomass. 8,000 pounds, that's close to about the biomass that you would get from a normal, well, it's a little less actually than a wheat crop, for instance, or a dairy silage crop. Compare that with what happened in 2007 right here, where we didn't get the rains. The rains didn't come. We didn't put the irrigation water. We got 27 pounds of dry matter per acre. So there are variations and everything isn't the same. But on average, we've actually gotten considerable amount of organic matter, 32 tons over these 20 years, and 15 tons of carbon just by capturing photosynthetic energy in the winter period in the form of cover crop biomass, and that eventually adding to the soil there. We talked about infiltration. This is something that, to me, it's just astonishing. What you're seeing here, we've been comparing, not in an orchard, granted, but in a long-term no-till with cover crop, no-till without cover crop, and then standard tillage with and without cover crop systems comparison here. And this is the infiltration time. These are actually on the y-axis on the left-hand side over there. The number of seconds it takes to infiltrate 1, 2, 3, or 4 inches of water. And if you look at this, I'm not sure if you're seeing my cursor here, but on the left 4 bars of the graph there, it's taking just a matter of seconds to infiltrate 4 inches of water. Compare that with over here on the right hand, the standard tillage without cover crops, you're taking close to an hour in terms of the time required to infiltrate the same amount of water. So Rory said these are well known. We see these and they're well known things. Let me just show you what that looks like actually. in terms of the soils we've done here. This will take just a second here if you can. Are you able to see the screen here? Is that okay? All right, on the left, you've got the standard tillage, no cover crop system. We've used a rainfall simulator from above. We add the same amount of water to both systems. We collect the water that runs off and that infiltrates into the soil. And you can see, you'll see the striking differences. This didn't happen for the first several years there. And as Rory pointed out very aptly, changes take time. But what you're about to see, the water is now dripping through the holes in the plastic plate there. And soon you'll see the impact of the rainfall simulator on infiltration in both of those conditions. So in your area where you're getting much greater rainfall than the 7 inches we get down here where I am, this can be quite significant. So let's see what happens in both conditions there. I forgot which one happens first. It looks like the cover crop one will happen there. So the rainfall is beginning there. You can start to see a little bit of water coming out on the spout there on the left side there, but not a whole lot there. And I'll show you the infiltration that happens there. In a second, we'll see what happens on the right-hand side here. And I know many of you have seen these kind of gimmicky show and tell demonstrations there, but they are quite dramatic there. In a matter of seconds, there's the runoff. And none of this was doctored. The soils were just collected from the long-standing field comparisons. It is, without exaggerating here, rather stunning, I think here. And down in a minute there, you can see that water is leaving there. The soil is crusted, it's slaked. The amount of runoff is down here. They're quite significant there. That water didn't go in the soil. It probably would have ended up ponding at a lower area, whereas in the cover crop system, that's the amount of water that infiltrated into the soil. So let me move ahead here. Some of the things that I might encourage some of you, those of you who are farmers or technical service providers who work with farmers, there are a couple of very good tools. And if you haven't seen these kind of aggregation tools here, this is just a regular slake test as part of the USDA NRCS soil quality test kit. And the idea is that you take a clod of soil and you watch what happens to it after putting it in water or dunking it for 5 seconds there. We've actually used that little simple dunking test there, and we've seen that the stability, the way that the soil holds together is quite different on the cover crop no-till system compared to the standard till no-till system. So you can use these somewhat qualitative systems there to gauge how your soil is performing. Another technique that some of you probably have heard of already is called the Slakes test. This is actually just a mobile phone app that you can get. And what it does is that you drop a clod or an aggregate of soil into a pan of water, and you use the mobile phone, and it will trace a perimeter around that clod in the water. And it will monitor that clod for the next 10 minutes and see if it stays together, it's well aggregated. The perimeter doesn't expand. If it's not well aggregated and it slakes or it falls apart, the perimeter will grow larger and it will actually calculate an index number for you. And again, we've actually used this kind of a thing, and you can see what that looks like here. This is actually a clod of soil, and right before our eyes in a second, you're going to see that clod just disintegrate and not hold together. So these kind of things I would encourage you to look at here. And I'll give you an example of what this looks like from our long-standing soil as well there. I'm belaboring some of the demonstration on this here, but on the left, you've got the standard soil without any cover crop. And on the right hand, you've got the presumably better aggregated soil, the cover crop without disturbance there. And again, you probably have seen these kind of demonstrations, but not only are they dramatic to the view, to the eye, but we've also measured these kinds of things as well. Now, this is by all means, as Rory pointed out too, none of this is new. This was a newspaper that caught my eye down here in the Fresno Bee, and it was talking about in 1930 in Madera County, there was a field day that was highlighting the use of cover crops. Let me wrap this up now, Rory and Emily, with maybe putting some perspective on the water angle on cover crop use here. And I want to emphasize that what I'm about to share with you, I think from our research team, that includes a number of people, including a couple of colleagues, Samuel Sandoval Solis at UC Davis, Daniel Zachariah at UC Davis, and the PhD student, Alyssa DiVincentis, who actually wrote the article that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But in one of the preconceptions or some of the dogma related to cover crops that Rory intimated earlier on is that they use an awful lot of water. And in my looking at, in our looking through the literature about cover crops, there are really about 4 major articles that I think we can find about California cover crop water use. One goes back over here on the left side to 1989. It was a California Ags article written by Terry Pritchard, the tree crop extension specialist down in San Joaquin County. And what that article showed was that if you let your cover crops grow during the winter time and well into the summer, you can actually have about 30% higher water consumption than, and this was monitored by neutron probe tubes into the soil, than if you just had bare surface throughout that period there. So that's one finding. That was a long duration into the summer kind of a cover crop. The second article that I'm pointing out, whoops, let me go back here, is more recent, 2015. And this gets into some of our work down here in Western Fresno County. This study, again, used neutron probe to try to determine the volumetric water content of soils down quite deep, down to about 2 meters. And it concluded that if you terminate your cover crops probably in the late March period, that in the 3 years of that study, there was perhaps a difference of about 2 inches throughout that whole profile of water. The cover crops ended up using more water than the bare soil. The more recent work right here is 2021. This is by the work by the group up at Davis that I mentioned the names of before. This will be published later on this year in California Agriculture. And I'll show you the results of that as well there. And this is where Rory's field came in, or Rory's orchard came into play. And then there's going to be another article that makes about the same conclusion as the California Ag. What we did that's relevant for our group discussion this morning is we monitored soil water content under cover crops and normal or bare fallow conditions at about 13 different orchards and also tomato fields in the San Joaquin and Sacramento valleys. And you can see the kind of comparisons that we did here. On the right side, that's clean chemical fallow in the wintertime. You can see on the left side where it was either vegetation, native vegetation. The white tube there is a neutron probe access tube. We went down to 9 feet there. And here is the primary finding here that comes out of the article that will be published in California Agriculture. This is from the abstract. And I read at the bottom there, soil moisture does not differ between treatment, which was the cover crop, and the control 86% of the time. And excuse me, evapotranspirative losses due to winter cover crops are approximately 30 millimeters, or about 3 centimeters, so about 1.5 inches. So the difference is on the order of, again, we've heard already, about 1.5 inches. When soil moisture is different between treatment, the cover crop, and the control, it primarily occurred in the top 1.2 meters of soil. That makes sense because that's where the roots are. That's where the water draw is coming from. And in fields that have a long history of practicing winter cover cropping. The results presented in this article show that largely rain-fed winter cover crops likely break even in terms of actual consumptive use of water, and many California growers can adopt winter cover cropping without altering their irrigation management practices for high-value specialty crops. Now that's a mouthful. That's an awful lot to say and also to accept there. But let's talk a little bit about why that might be true. Part might be the case here. Let's go back here, and it's too big for you to see the whole picture. But let's imagine what's going on in terms of the mechanisms of water movement under a cover crop system on your left side and under bare soil condition on the right. All right, the same processes in terms of water movement or water flow are happening in both situations. Yes, there's going to be on the left side over here where that big blue arrow going up is, there's going to be transpiration from the cover crop. All right, as soon as the stomates open up in the morning, they're losing water to the atmosphere. That's going to be inevitable happening there. During the winter cover cropping period, however, the evapotranspiration demand tends to be quite low, as you all know. There's not a lot of heat. There's not a lot of demand for ET in the winter time. It's about 1/10 of what it is in summer. There also is, on the right-hand side, there's soil water evaporation. So just because you don't have a cover crop, it doesn't mean you're not losing water to soil water evaporation. On the right-hand side, you may have, as we've seen, runoff. You may have water that ponds in certain areas that goes to a low spot in the orchard or completely out of the orchard if it's really extreme there. Whereas on the left side, presumably a lot of that water, as I tried to show you in some of the orchards that are being remediated with cover crops in the irrigation line there probably is going to be increased infiltration happening. Another thing that's happening with the cover crop surface is that the surface soil is going to be cooler. You're shading because of the cover crop canopy. Another thing that we often overlook there in this on the left side is, and again, if you really are careful when you're walking out in the early morning all the way up to about 10 o'clock in an orchard that has cover crops in it during the winter period, I would surmise that on a number of mornings, you're going to find dew or that is still prevalent on the leaf surfaces or the stems of the cover crop. And that eventually it will consolidate down the plant stem and eventually go into the soil there. So there are different mechanisms that are operating under these situations that might help us to understand and explain the relatively modest or minimal changes that we're seeing in soil water content under cover crop versus bare conditions here. So I want to acknowledge all of the collaborators on this work. It's been a very large, very intensive project, and all the folks that were really outstanding partners on this, including Rory. And if there are, Emily, any questions, I'll stop the sharing here. But again, I thank you all here for the opportunity to be part of this, this wonderful conference this morning. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, that was a great presentation. I think it's really interesting, especially how, given some of the nuances we're talking about in orchard systems, given the differences in climate throughout the state, of course, soil types, whatnot, from what your recent research is showing is that even taking all of these different things into account, you're looking at different sites throughout the valley, and it sounds like the overall, kind of conclusion we think is a positive one in terms of, in terms of cover cropping and the requirements for irrigation. So that really says something. And yeah, I think with that, we have, a couple of minutes to take questions. So we have some questions coming in. The first question, which I'll pose, I think, to Rory, is a specific one about biosolarization. How many tons per acre of shell and husk did you apply under the plastic when you were doing biosolarization?
Good question.
Very specific one.
Yeah, no, that's good. It was, I think, oh man, it's been a while. We specifically applied it within a 10-foot swath. So it wasn't, between those trees, theoretically, It's going to be 22, but we tried to do it in the tree row where we would actually plant that tree. So we concentrated it. And I want to say at least 2 tons in that concentration, but I could be wrong on that. So, it was multiple passes with a huge spreader. I can get the details on that for that gentleman or lady, and we could share that. So, but yeah.
Great, thank you, Rory. Another question we have, which I think is directed towards Rory, but I know Jeff, you also spoke to the kind of marketing aspect of these practices and cover cropping specifically. So feel free to answer as well, Jeff. And the question is, could you address specifically, the cover cropping water benefit for almonds and walnuts, since these are quickly joining, meat and dairy on no eat lists because of drought? It's kind of a similar situation we saw a couple of years ago where, consumers are becoming aware of some of the water usage of these crops, and the demand is, might be changing. And then also the second part, to that question is, how will you, Rory, market this benefit to hesitant potential buyers? Kind of a big question.
Sure. Yeah, I think the first part of that is I have to go back and say a lot of this collaboration between, kind of the markets or those who are bringing these products to market and the growers is still not codified the way it needs to be. It's in the process of doing that with like Regen 1, like Jeff was talking about. Our hulling and shelling facility, North State Hulling, has been in various meetings with some of these huge conglomerate companies, General Mills, Nestle. At the end of the day, I don't know how much momentum we have tomorrow, for example, or for the 2021 crop. Those collaborations need a significant amount of attention, both from growers, but also processors, then ultimately some of these companies. I don't know the details as to why it hasn't gotten more traction. I get emails from Regen 1 and some of these other places. And so I think those organizations are really critical to come behind and to try to seek a lot of collaborative efforts with. But I don't know, that's kind of mine. I mean, I've heard a couple people ask me like, hey, we know who we can sell your almonds to because you're doing cover crops. And I just say, okay, let me know, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to show, lay out what we've done and what our practices are. We will be as transparent as we can be, especially with cover cropping, 100%. But there's just not that teeth there yet. And I think we've got to keep working on that.
Emily, I would agree. I think Emily or Rory, you're spot on with that, because these things. Well, I do believe things like these mechanisms for interactions are going to be realized at some point. Maybe not in the not too distant future there, but the pieces are not all linked together there, as Rory just said there. And I'm with you on that there. I just happened, and maybe some of you saw this as well. There was a mobile phone thing. Sorry for sharing Twitter or Facebook or wherever this came from, but this caught my attention. A farmer-owned local food app stands out from the venture capital-backed crowd. And again, so there are lots of very innovative, grassroots things that you all perhaps are involved with that I have no idea about at an individual, orchard or farm level that, are underway as well there. But I do think that there is a promising future for the integration of these kind of connections there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both. And yeah, I think in some respects it's encouraging to see even, huge corporate, entities in the food system like Nestle encouraging some of these practices. But yeah, there's some ways to go for sure. Another question.
Follow up just
Sure.
real quick with that. The rubber is going to meet the road when these guys really need it to affect their bottom line, the big corporations. Okay. And so perhaps it hasn't done that. Perhaps they're kind of maybe doing this just from a mere marketing perspective. But when people stop buying their products, obviously that comes back on the agriculturalists, right? Because they can change prices and cut costs and kind of things. Like we still have to grow the crop. So there's going to kind of be this nexus, right? And I think the nexus is this tension point where the big corporations or whoever, I mean, it might not be a big corporation, and the growers are like, well, we can't market. And largely what we're talking about is a North American phenomenon, right? I mean, so we've got other problems with Europe, with Roundup, for example, or, you know, you name it, there's just other problems there. But this is kind of a North American phenomenon with these companies that are dealing with their consumers that rightfully so are saying, what are your sustainable practices? Water, what are this? Bees and cover crops and soil erosion. So I think to some degree, bottom lines have to be hurt because that's kind of getting everybody to change. And that's a really unfortunate thing. I wish we could, you know, create a program, which a lot of these organizations are doing, where we are forward thinking and we are intentional, and we say we're going to create this program before that nexus tension point hits where we're just losing money, they're losing money. And I think we're doing that to some degree, but you know, it's when the bottom line starts getting hurt, that's when people change, right? So I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's right. And it's kind of like your analogy of moving the barge as well, right?
Yeah.
It's slow movement. I think we just have time really for one more question, and for both of you, you know, feel free to answer this. Is there really any concern with competition for bees with cover crops when, you know, when almonds need them?
No. Just go ahead and say it. You know, this is one of those misnomers that I wasn't able to hit on in my talk, but you know, and to some degree, I mean, it's justified. You know, we have to kind of have this, you know, Jeff, scientific hypothesis. Do they go here? Do they go here? I personally, kind of on a anecdotal level, you know, some of the biggest crops that we've ever gotten were when cover crops were 6 feet high. Okay, in the aments. So if somebody wants to study that, that's fine. But you know, generally speaking, what I know about the bloom is that the bees, you know, they prefer, you know, almond pollen over some of these mustards or daikon or whatever. So, and it's just, and you walk into an orchard, you're not smelling mustard, you're smelling this beautiful kind of honey-esque, you know, bloom almond. So it's just that much more powerful. It's that much more overwhelming for that bee. I think that bee, you know, pretty clearly just prefers that. And so just again, anecdotally over a couple of years, you know, we're getting the biggest crop, and the amount of sloughing off of the nuts that happens, and then what's actually being held on is significant. So there's some thoughts there. It's what the tree can actually take. But the overall answer to that, in my experience, not scientific work, is no, absolutely not.
And Emily, Rory, just to follow up to there is information. So the person who asked that question there, Dr. Amelie Gaudin, Gaudin, and most of you probably know her from work that she's done with the Almond Board of California as well. I'm sure you can find her findings there. She has, you know, done the investigations for what Rory has just described there. So I would defer to her for myself here, and she's written a lot of that stuff up there. I'll put her name up in the chat there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, there's some really excellent work happening under the Gaudin lab around cover cropping and almonds underway right now. And yeah, I think we're already at 10:30. You know, we have some more questions coming in, and I think we might be able to follow up later with folks, you know, as far as answering those. But for today, I think we're going to wrap it up, and just want to thank both Jeff and Rory again so much for being here with us today. Really appreciate, you know, the real world wisdom, practical knowledge, and research experience as well, and good work that you're both doing. So thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. And yeah, again, just take a look at, you know, some of the information in the chat. We have a couple of good resources there. CAFF, you know, we put out recently a practical kind of decision-making guide that can aid you in figuring out the, you know, appropriate seed mix and kind of troubleshooting issues with cover cropping in your orchards or perennial systems. And also just would ask, you know, if you have a minute, we have a feedback form that we really appreciate y'all to fill out, and that just helps us to better understand your needs really, and assess the information that we're providing here and make improvements too. So just check that out in the comments if you have the time. And with that, yeah, would like to thank everybody for joining us here today. Thank you again, Rory and Jeff, and look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
All right, take care, everyone.